Hello, welcome back. What's the gossip?
Do you have gossip from the faculty meeting today?
Um, there was a discussion of how we might revise our software engineering manifesto.
It was a very long list of ideas, but I thought your suggestions were kind of interesting. Like just use AI to.
I didn't realize these things were recorded and sort of sent out broadly. I should be more careful with what I say.
I just like skimmed notes. What did you say?
I just skimmed them too, so I didn't really like read through the whole thing.
I suggested using a chatbot or several to brainstorm and iterate on ways to update the manifesto, to today's practice of software engineering. Other gossip is the Claude bot guy got hired by OpenAI.
Oh,
Did you see? That's kind of big news. Has anybody tried it? Does anybody have it running? I'd love to see what it does.
Claude bot.
Yeah.
I tried using Claude Cowork, which is, I'm not sure if that's the thing.
So ClaudeBot is an independent open source thing, has nothing to do with Anthropic.
Okay, I see.
Hence them threatening to sue him, so he changed the name to OpenClaw. OpenClaw as in lobster claw, not as in Claude.
Okay.
Say for ClaudeBot, not ClaudeBot. So nobody has tried this?
I should try it, but on my Mac Studio, I have the cloud ID sign up. So I was thinking that I should probably just try it with the new account without my account ID.
But people are using it for their WhatsApp and Telegram and whatever sort of personal communication and stuff.
Good use cases to try it, but I'm still not sure if I'm what sort of personal access
I mean, so you
I
could,
want to be giving it.
yeah, it could have access to everything that you have on your
Exactly.
phone.
I'm personally skeptical of giving it access to everything.
But you could talk to your parents for you, right?
Yeah,
Stuff like this.
That's creepy.
If anybody tries this, I'm curious to hear opinions. I have not tried this myself yet. Curious what it does, how it works.
It's also either pretty expensive or really bad, right? Because either you get it Focus, whatever,
Yeah.
and it eats all your money, or you run the local model and it's really stupid. So I might try it if I had money.
I've been using Cloud Code more recently. I've been using VS Code Copilot for the longest time. I switched to Cloud Code, and I have this used to be $1 a month Claude subscription. I think it's just ending now. It's switching to whatever 20. But even with this paid plan, which is the whatever pro plan or something, I basically get 5 minutes out of it, and then it runs out. I find it super annoying.
I think for some reason Opus 4.6, even though it's only a little bit better than 4.5, it's way more usage.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I use open code sometimes with Cloud, and yeah, with 4.5 I can get a decent amount of usage, and with 4.6 I get pretty much nothing out of it.
I should switch to a worse model. I don't know. I was just excited to try the latest, greatest thing.
Yeah.
I found this, I thought it was a life hack for a while where, Claude Code ran out in 5 minutes. I switched back to VS Code Copilot, where you can use the same Opus 4.6 model. And it seemed endless. And I was like, wow, this is an amazing life hack, right? So A, it's free for academic use through the GitHub thing. B, it seems endless. Only to learn just yesterday that it had run out. And unlike Cloud Code, which is takes a few hours for it to refill, this one's it has run out for weeks. So come back in March. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna work. So anyway, it's very annoying.
The .edu email, you get 6 months free with Cursor, and then you can use Opus.
I tried that.
Oh.
Cursor does it is not very reliable for student IDs. Like I tried to sign up for it and they blocked me for some reason. And
Really?
now, yeah, I had a huge back and forth with Cursor about this. Like, I'm a student, let me access it.
Yeah.
They were like, no, you've run out. Like, we cannot get it verified manually. There is a formal process. And,
I think if you do it through your GitHub, like your GitHub student stuff, maybe that's what it did.
probably.
Then,
Not sure.
yeah, I didn't have any issue with it, but
Okay.
it is still like a monthly allowance. So like if you use it all in 5 minutes, wait a month.
Yeah.
You know, what's interesting is that over winter break, I signed up for Cursor Pro. They changed the deal, so it's like before you would get Pro for a year, and now they're giving you Pro Plus for only 6 months.
Yeah,
So-
that's what I did.
I saw like some message that said, oh, you know, students come get 6 months of Pro Plus for free, and then you can't do both at the same time. If you move like the 6 month one, it cancels the year-long one, so.
But is this another life hack where I can run out of Cloud Code and VS Code Copilot and I can then use Cursor with the
Yeah.
same backend?
Yeah, a lot of people do that.
Like free for 6 months, then you have to pay 20%.
It's annoying. Still, I mean, 6 months, who knows, like what will happen in 6 months?
Come up, they'll give you to the trial.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Is this like, is there a fourth life hack here?
If you use AMP free, it shows you ads.
Like, how desperate should I be, right?
They're not like LLM injected ads, it's just like an ad above the prompt.
Oh, so harmless.
But it does use like what you're working on to choose what ad to show you. But all of their things are like, all of their sponsors are just web dev things.
Oh,
So it doesn't have real value. But it gives you $10 a day free of like whatever their usage is. Which is like, okay,
Can you Slack me the link for that?
yeah.
Yeah, always looking for I don't know, way to save a buck on LLM. It's becoming like streaming, like video streaming. Like now you have to like subscribe to a million of these things. It ends up costing a lot of money
At some point, you're just like, I should just learn how to do this.
from scratch, right? Yeah. So now I'm going through this like stubbornness phase where like even if it's like it would take me less time to edit the one line, I refuse to do it. So I ask it to change it for me.
That's why you're running out of it in 5 minutes.
That could be it. Yeah, that could be it. I should be more, I don't know, deliberate with how I use it. Okay, let's talk about, we have a part 2 survey, a few more interesting things we didn't cover last time. And I think we have a paper. Let's start with the paper, and then we'll go back to the remainder of last time's survey design lecture. Do you want to join the call and share your screen? That would be a useful way. There you go. By the way, this is fresh off the press. I think it's currently under review somewhere. I happen to collaborate with one of the authors. I learned about the paper directly from the authors.
Oh.
But it's, as fresh as they get in terms
Yeah.
of methodology for using LLMs for qualitative analysis.
Right. I have a few criticisms of the paper that I will share in the end.
The author was very eager to hear our thoughts, so yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, as Bogdan mentioned, this is a very recent paper that was published on Archive in January 2026. It's titled Self-Reflection in Automated Qualitative Coding. And it's been done in collaboration by a bunch of people at University of Stuttgart, UC Davis, and University of Washington. Okay. So the key problem that this paper is trying to tackle is the unreliability of LLM assigned codes in what is otherwise been described in literature as the annotation Wild West. So the process of annotation is extremely hard, cumbersome, manually and cognitively intensive. And language models tend to are prone to sycophancy. They are eager to please, and that leads to very low precision and a high number of false positives. So the gap that this paper is trying to address is how to address structured errors made by an already calibrated annotation model for substantive use. And here by an already calibrated annotation model, I mean a language model that has already been iterated over multiple times by prompting it in different ways just to improve the accuracy on the base task. But even after this prompt engineering in deployment or when you are dealing with a real world use case, um, researchers find that these language models or these calibrated language models struggle from these structured errors in the annotation process. That makes these models unreliable, and there has not been a lot of work to address this sort of gap. And the hook that this paper is trying to address, so the authors claim that they propose a method to make nuanced qualitative codes more usable at scale. And they believe that they are contributing to this emerging hermeneutic turn in computational text analysis. So hermeneutics is a term that means a theory of interpretation. So what this statement essentially means is that they are using a language model to sort of introduce a change in the way they interpret qualitative codes, especially when you're dealing with a complex problem in computational text analysis. So they propose a two-stage annotation pipeline where the focus is on first having an annotator language model. When given a data set, in this case, they had a data set of emails by the Apache Software Foundation. I'll talk about the task in a bit, but they had a data set of about 3,000 emails. And the first stage in the pipeline was to introduce this annotator language model that tried to label the data set based on an already provided codebook. So they used an enriched gold standard, which was about 120 emails to verify and evaluate this base. Once they had this labeled data set by the LLM, they chose the examples per code that were labeled as positive examples. By positive examples, I mean, so if it's a binary classification task where the model is trying to predict if a code is valid given the email, then the model is predicting yes and no, like the code is valid or the code is invalid. So positive examples only include the ones that the model deemed as valid. Then after collecting this data set of predicted positives, they introduced the critic language model, which goes through all the examples that were classified as positive by the language model, by the annotator, and tries to validate them based on certain criteria that the authors provided. The critic's job is to validate these labels, and it confirms the label if the critic feels that the label is in the label is related to the provided decision rule, or the critic can also veto and say that the label is invalid in case it finds some discrepancy in the provided decision rule and the previous language model output. And based on the output of the critic, the final labels are assigned to the original email, and the authors verify both the critic and the end-to-end pipeline separately using a data set of about 150 emails in the end. So in their pipeline, they had about 4 steps. Step 1 in their method is how they developed the codebook and how they performed the first stage of annotations, the first stage coding. The second step was the error analysis, where they tried to develop a taxonomy of errors that the language model is making and try to identify why these false positives are emerging. Step 3 was to build a prompting strategy for the secondary language model, the critic in this case. And step 4 was them analyzing the end-to-end pipeline, the two-stage annotation process that they come up with. So the first step in their method was the codebook development and first stage coding. The research question was how senior members of the Apache Software Foundation evaluate project success. So they had a data set of about 3,000 emails from the Apache Software Foundation, and they used thematic analysis They first conducted a thematic analysis of 16 semi-structured interviews with ASF members to come up with codes. And these codes represented the evaluation criteria for projects. And finally, 6 codes emerged from this thematic analysis. And then an LLM, in this case GPT-4o, was used to classify the data set of those 3,000 emails using the 6 codes that the authors came up with using thematic analysis. For prompting the language model, they provided the definitions that came up in the thematic analysis, and also tried to introduce some boundary clauses and negative examples to guide the prompting of the language model. And finally, to evaluate the language model output, 2 experts independently labeled a gold standard of 120 emails and tried to validate the output of the language model. So once the language model output was evaluated, one author audited a random sample of 60 one-stage positive passages per code and assigned an error class when invalid. And based on this inductive coding of different kinds of errors that the model was making, there were 2 errors that were primarily found. The first was this error, which they describe as the meta discussion error, and it is a classic use versus mention problem. And by this, I mean that imagine an email where they're talking about some evaluation criteria and discussing if it is valid or not, but they're not actually using that criteria to evaluate a project. In that case, they're just having a discussion about the criteria. So that's not the correct assignment of a label and a false positive. A misinterpretation is a kind of error where the model tends to miss some exclusion criteria that they provide in the context of the language model, and that gets emerged from the code book. So based on the error taxonomy that the authors came up with, they prompted the secondary LLM, which was the LLM critic. They used a sufficiency rule where the idea was to sort of asking the critic to overturn the positive label only when there was no valid justification for that label in the annotator's response. So even if there was a part of the response that seemed valid, then the critic was asked to not veto the label. But if the entire rationale behind the assignment of the label by the annotator was completely wrong, only when the critic was asked to veto the label and classify the output as invalid. So this is what they describe as the sufficiency rule. They used a 3-layer prompt where the first stage was task framing, where they described the task of the LLM critic. Then they also provided the decision policy, which included the justification of the sufficiency rule and the error taxonomy, the 2 labels, meta discussion and misclassification that they found from inductive coding. And they also provided the input-output contract, which was the format that the model should follow. And they also evaluated the end-to-end performance of this 2-stage pipeline on a new gold standard set of 150 passages. So these were the results that they reported on the end-to-end pipeline. They talk about the detected positive rate, the agreement, which is the Cohen's-Kappa metric. But what's interesting is the F1 score. And if you look at the F1 score across a few categories, specifically if you look at technical and market and mentor and engagement, you would see that the delta of improvement of the F1 score is pretty significant. So in the case of mentor engagement, for example, you would see that there is a 0.25 improvement in the F1 score. And this is primarily due to the better detection of false positives using the critic. And similar is the case with technical and market. For some other categories like community, vitality, and corporate involvement, they did not observe a lot of false positives to begin with. So the improvement or the delta of improvement that they observed for corresponding to those codes was limited. But the performance still remains stable after using the critic. So it wasn't like the performance degraded or something. So these were some interesting discussion points that the paper pointed out. They talked about this specific division of labor idea, where the two stages of the pipeline are essentially trying to optimize for different objectives. The annotator model, which is the first stage, is trying to optimize for recall, trying to improve the detection of false negatives as much as possible, whereas the LLM critic in the second stage is trying to optimize for precision and trying to really limit the number of false positives that the model makes in stage one. The authors talk about this idea of bounded autonomy, where the self-reflection step that they introduce in the second stage of their pipeline is instrumented and directed by the research team, which means that the manual inductive error analysis that they did after stage one was super critical to improve the performance of the critic. If you don't if you don't introduce these constraints around the critic, then it is likely that the critic can hallucinate and make a lot of incorrect assumptions about what is going wrong in the first place, which could potentially lead to some undesirable outcomes. The authors also talk about this idea of adding hermeneutic value, which is again this notion that LLMs help the authors to identify ambiguities in the original code book. So in this case, the paper does talk about how the authors completely missed identifying meta discussion kinds of use versus mention problem errors in the original code book. So the original code book was ambiguous. And after doing the LLM error analysis, they were able to identify this error, this ambiguity that was present in the original code book. So LLM error analysis also helped them improve their definitions and improve their sort of understanding of the codes, which I believe is a cool insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last aspect that the paper also talks about is compute efficiency, which is this idea that the critic model is only running on positives and not the entire data set. So if if you're doing some like an iterative sort of refinement, then you don't need to be running a language model on the entire data set, but you can only run it on the positives, which brings some compute efficiency to the process. But again, I would take that insight with a grain of salt, because the paper also states that this could significantly vary depending on the task and the base error rate of the annotator. So these are like some of my 2 cents on the paper. I personally felt like the multi-stage evaluation process revealed some important insights. The cool one was the addition of the hermeneutic value that I described in the previous slide, where the authors talked about how their understanding and of the code book evolved by using this sort of LLM critic. But some of the limitations of the paper that I sort of reflected on while reading this was first that there was no acknowledgement section in the paper, which was surprising.
No acknowledgement section?
Sorry, no limitation section. And the critic also in this case relies on a human crafted error taxonomy, and it also relies on the same base model as the annotator. And if you're familiar with literature on LLM as a judge, usually a lot of literature talks about maybe having a different language model as a critic might be a more useful thing to do than relying on the base model itself. So this was something that the paper did not talk about. And the reliance on the human crafted error taxonomy also sort of introduces introduces this constraint of manually going through all the errors that the model is trying to make and try to make sense of the errors before you can make decision rules for the critic. So there is that level of like manual process that is something you need to do. Again, sort of one insight that I sort of thought about was that the error taxonomy could very well vary with the task. In this case, the authors identified two broad error types, meta discussions and misrepresentations. But there could be other kinds of errors that the model might make. And the generalizability was not demonstrated in this paper. Um, the paper also did not focus on coming up with initial codes in the first place. This was more about how we can improve the reliability of the LLM when you're giving it an annotation task. Um, the manual taxonomy construction, as I mentioned, is still a bottleneck, especially the error taxonomy, but also coming up with initial codes to begin with. And if you look at the results of the paper, the gains are concentrated in weaker codes. So if I go back to the results, you would observe that the improvements are only across codes which were performing poorly initially. But for example, something like policy compliance is where they did not, where they only observed a very modest improvement in false positives. So some of the inherent limitations of language modeling still exist. So if you were to take an average of all the codes, then probably the approach is performing with a modest improvement. So yeah, that is what I thought of the paper. I'll be open to questions now.
Super, thanks. Has anybody else looked at this? I have questions. So, okay, I'll start. There's a few things that I'm confused about. One is the point of it all. So, if I still have to do all this manual work to come up with a code book, that essentially means that by that point, I will have done the hard work of qualitative analysis.
Yeah.
The second phase where I scale that up to the rest of my data set by just applying an existing code book without, refining it and extending it and whatever. So I've done all of this iterative work of coding.
Right.
The themes I can derive from the first rounds of coding already.
Right.
So this second phase, or applying this at larger scale over the rest of my data, just gives me more of the same data. Does not give me new kinds of data, fundamentally, the way you're describing it.
Yeah.
So when I do qualitative thematic analysis, for example, I don't care about frequency distributions at all. The goal is not to see what's more common. The goal is to understand all the ways in which something is happening.
Yeah.
So I don't care about the reliability of the second stage.
I agree. Yeah, that is a concern I share with you. Like initially, when I started reading the paper, I was very interested in trying to see how like they're sort of trying to come up with new codes, but this is not what they're tackling at all. Their focus is on, so the paper does talk about introducing this new phase in the process, which is this post hoc analysis, as compared, and compares that to this iterative process of coming up with codes. So the paper does not discount the value of that iterative process, but it does mention that sort of this post hoc analysis helps them reshape their understanding of the codes that emerge.
That was nice.
Process.
I agree. That was indeed nice.
So I think what they're trying to argue is an introduction of sort of this human in the loop LLM step in the overall qualitative coding process, rather than trying to come up with a way to automate the entire process itself.
Which is what I would like.
Yeah. In that sense, definitely, I feel like this is an approach in the limited time period would be valuable. But I think Self-reflection is also a very, I would say, it depends. Like the output and the reliability of the approach would depend on how good an understanding of the initial codes you already have. Like if the definitions are very poor to begin with, then I believe even the critic is not going to be doing a very good job of trying to come up with, you know, like a valid interpretation of whether the assignment is correct or not. So I think the bottleneck still is very much how good your initial definitions are.
Which is the value you're arguing is being added fundamentally.
Yes, yes, but it's a cyclic process. Like it does help you improve the definitions that you come up with initially, but I believe for the critic to also do a decent job, you need to provide it like a very good sense of what the errors in the data set are.
So how did they identify the errors? What was that?
That was again manually looking at positively labeled examples in the data set. So they did an inductive analysis of the language model labels to come up with categorization and taxonomy of errors.
Great. So at that point, why not just add these two examples of negatives to your original prompt for the annotator model?
So again, I think the idea is that the division of responsibility. So the first stage in the pipeline is focusing on just trying to do the initial classification. And if you're trying to optimize for two objectives at the same time, both recall and precision, then that is hurting accuracy. So, so what they're using the base annotator for is just to do the initial assignment, and the job of actually validating that against, I don't know, checks and errors is the job of the critic.
But that's an empirical question, right? Why? I'm saying
That's a statement. That's
Yeah.
not proven by the paper.
Yeah,
throw away the critic entirely. Yeah, just add to the prompt of the annotator these two failure modes. And make sure you avoid making these mistakes. The clause style, make no mistakes.
yeah. I mean, that is certainly something that I think one should try and experiment with, because the paper certainly does not make an argument about why that would hurt performance, but like the general LLM literature is like this decompose tasks and divide responsibility, and that seems to be improving performance.
Makes
So I
sense.
think they are sort of they're sort of building up on that idea.
Yeah, makes sense.
I thought it was more nuanced than that. Decompose and assign responsibility, or just use a bigger model. So the place I've seen the most compelling evidence for decomposing working is on smaller models, less performant models. We have to be more precise and break the task down for them. So if you just decompose the task, by the time they're done reviewing this, let's just say a better model that does it all in one. Yeah.
But I mean, maybe there's an economic argument. If you're, me and you've spent all your tokens on the big model.
Yeah.
If you're out of tokens, you have to use a smaller model.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So I really like this idea of using the LLM to help you refine your codebook, essentially.
Mhm.
That seems like a really good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that the Donovan paper is one of the ones they build on. I think it's one of the ones we'll be reading maybe next week, Tuesday.
Oops.
That's more of an end-to-end thing, if I remember correctly.
I think so. They talk about it. Donovan is this one.
Yeah.
They
so-
use it, adapted codebook. They proposed a method for, I think, doing first stage coding.
I'd be curious to see sort of a high quality end-to-end thing done entirely automatically.
Yeah, that would be cool.
All right, thanks a lot. This was a great presentation. Thank you. So I will move back to this. All right. So we talked about a few, oops, you're still here. Somebody should fix the UI for Zoom. All right, we talked about some of these biases that can creep into surveys. We talked about social desirability bias a bit last time. So this is when you're asking maybe about a sensitive topic, and people might not be so inclined to answer truthfully if the answer to your questions might paint them in a negative light. We talked about acquiescence, which is this tendency for people to be agreeable, to avoid conflicts. So they might just agree with whatever statements you present to them in an attempt to be agreeable. We didn't, so I think this is where we left off. We started talking about this primacy and recency idea. And this is sort of some complicated model. I'm not going to go into all of this. So I think self-administered versus interviewer-administered means, do you fill it out on your own independently versus do you fill it out in front of someone that's, observing you? So that could, be, for example, during an interview. Usually a survey you fill out independently, that would be the top row. An interview you do with an interviewer, that would be the bottom row. And depending on which of these elements that are presented to you as possible options are more plausible, you might be more or less inclined to choose the ones you've heard last or the ones you've heard first. So let me try to give you some concrete examples of this. One example of this comes up in anchoring. Have you heard this term? It's a popular phenomenon in TV game shows. So let's see. Okay, yeah. If I ask people which food is more typically German, we don't have any Germans? No Germans this year? No Germans. Which food is more typically German? If I say potatoes and rice, so I give them those two options. Okay, about 30% of respondents might say potatoes. If I say rice and potatoes, if I change the order, okay, about half said potatoes. So this is an example of people anchoring their answers in the thing they hear first. This is, by the way, so when you're, I don't know, negotiating or something for, I don't know, salary or the price of whatever, an item you're buying or this kind of stuff, this is where this anchoring will come up a lot. So, you should, I don't know, when you're negotiating with a recruiter, you should always, 10x the thing they're offering. So then you can go back down a bit from there to something that you end up agreeing on, as opposed to just, 10% more than what they're offering or something. Right? Because, that anchors the discussion and the last number that you present. So this would also come up in survey questions that have answer options. So I'll show you some concrete examples of that in a minute. Okay, so survey questions, they could be open-ended, or you could ask for some facts. For example, how many years have you lived in Nebraska? Please report only whole numbers and round up or something like that. So you're asking for some facts, or things like how satisfied are you with something living in Nebraska? And then there's some scale like this, from completely satisfied to maybe completely dissatisfied or similar. And just some examples. Yeah, this is a cool fun fact. If you ask people to report, I guess men in this case, to report on their height, this is the distribution of answers. Anybody notice anything interesting?
Strangely few number 5'11".
Yeah, notice how so if you would human height is normally distributed. This is something we know. So notice how there's an artifact there, like 5'11", right? So people that are actually 5'11" round up, Okay, they report they're 6 feet tall, which is why you see this distribution of answers and catch people lying this way about their height. Okay, yeah, so you can give people answers they choose one out of, or you could give people things they check boxes. I've surely seen this before. Okay, here are some interesting nuances for how to ask about vague concepts. Yeah. Arguably, most of the questions you would be asking about in a survey are not facts. Facts you probably can obtain from somewhere else, so you probably don't need to run surveys for that. You probably will ask about more interesting concepts. So here's an example of how you phrase these questions can have a huge impact. Option one there is, how many times did you eat together as a family last week? And you want people to enter the number of meals as an answer. Okay. So on the surface, this looks harmless. But actually, if you start thinking about this, we've had this kind of discussion when we talked about interview protocols earlier. Um, what does it mean to eat as a family? Like, uh, is it enough that two members of the family are present? Do all members have to be present? What does it mean to eat together? Grabbing a banana in the morning on your way out as you're putting on your shoes while, your parent is, I don't know, having a coffee or something. Does that count as eating together as a family? Right? Do you stopping by Burger King on the way back from whatever school, does that count as eating together as a family, etc.? It's like all of these things about how the question's vague that we've talked about before. For example, about research questions, we've talked a lot about interview protocols as well. So here they give examples of how they can improve on this initial formulation of the question. Um, a revised question that's more specific and has more concrete concepts would be the one in the middle. How many meals did you eat together as a family at home last week? So, this would exclude, I don't know, Burger King or something that you grab on the way back. Or even better, even more specific, how many meals did you sit down to eat at home together as a family last week? Right? This would be maybe most concrete. Right? So maybe this would exclude, I don't know, breakfast or something that you grab while you're putting your shoes on or something. Okay? So like all of these things can hugely impact the quality of the answers you are getting back. Same as with research questions or interview questions. Okay, and then you have a list of guidelines here. I don't know what's interesting. Let's see. Yeah, keep it short and simple and clear. One common mistake, and I think we talked about this when we talked about interviews, asking one question at a time. Like there's a tendency to ask for multiple things in the same question. Do not do that. Break this up into separate questions. Ask one thing at a time and one thing only. It should not be ambiguous what you're really asking. And it should not be possible for people to kind of misinterpret ideally. Okay, so you can look at this. Right. More on the same on how to phrase open-ended questions. So some examples here. When did you begin your studies at Carnegie Mellon University, say? If you ask it this way, close to 60% of people report the semester or something as the answer. Only about 13% report the month and year as the answer, right? Because your question does not specify what type of data you're looking to get back. More precise, a better formulation of this question is the one at the very bottom, and you can see an example in the middle as well. What month and year did you begin your studies at, say, Carnegie Mellon University, right? That makes it very clear what kind of data you were expecting to get back. And indeed, people do provide this kind of data back when you ask it explicitly. Interesting also how some people still do not, even though you ask for it explicitly.
11% is a significant number.
Yeah. So some amount of noise or LLMs answering or whatever, people not reading the question carefully enough, that can still happen. But huge shift here in kind of the preciseness of the or the quality of the answers. you've also probably asked lots of things as part of a survey, so it might make sense to emphasize the questions that you really care the most about. So here's one example, like in your own words, how would you describe your advisor? Is one question potentially out of many in a survey. But if this question is key to your research, you really want to make sure people fill this one out and fill this one out carefully, then you can also like explicitly emphasize the importance of this question there. Like here, right? This question is very important to understanding the Washington State University student experience. Please take your time answering it. Right? So like emphasize to your respondents how useful to you and important this is. We talked about non-directive probes, I think also when we talked about interviews, so this is more of the same. Yeah, what businesses would you most like to see in Squirrel Hill that are currently not available? Right, so this was a study, right? And then a random half of the respondents, they asked a follow-up probe asking, are there any others, right? So people said something, and then you asked, are there any others? So just this was a study on the impact of this one simple probe. Okay, so substantial here increase in the amount of information they were able to get back. A lot more information, right, per participant with this one simple probe. So this, I think, more relevant to interviews, but may also help you with surveys. Right. How you ask the probe also is quite important. So is there anything else, which was the previous example? Are there any others? Okay. When you ask, are there any others, or is there anything else, this allows for the possibility of the answer being no. Right? In which case you have learned nothing additional, right? So that's not particularly useful. So here they studied the impact of just how they probe. Is there anything else versus can you tell me more about that specifically? Which I guess here you could also say no. So maybe just please tell me more about that as opposed to can you would be my edit to this. So this indeed gets more information out of participants. Okay, example of acquiescence bias in a survey. Do you favor congressional term limits of 4 years? And answer options are favor or oppose. Or how satisfied are you with the overall service you have received from your financial consultant? Very satisfied, very dissatisfied. Why is there acquiescence bias here? Marco.
Well, I don't know if this is an acquiescence bias, but there's no neutral option. You kind of force you into one direction.
Exactly. So people are going to try to be agreeable, right? So they will try to agree with everything you say and ask. So in this case, they will try to agree that they should favor congressional term limits.
But why is that? It's not like there's a person right in front of you and they ask you and you're trying to repeat.
Yeah, so like correct, right? So it would be worse potentially with the person in front of you, like the effect would be stronger. I think we had some examples last Tuesday, but still the effect would be present just from how you phrase the question.
It could also be answering, right? Because favor is placed before.
It could be, yeah. So how do we fix it? We'll talk about anchoring in a minute separately. How do we fix the acquiescence bias? By the way, you've earned more candy. Would you like me to throw some at you?
Yeah.
I have Nerds and Sour Patch.
Getting it.
I missed twice now. This is actually a lot more fun with like a class of 100 undergrads or something, when it's like really embarrassing if you miss, and the room is bigger, so like
You have to really show it.
yeah, it's like much more likely that you miss. How do we fix it?
Maybe by removing the satisfied and just say, what do you I don't know. I feel like the satisfied keyword is what leading to.
Good intuition. I gave you the answer last Tuesday. You should know this. We'll have a quiz next time. Any intuition?
Marco also said something important about giving the role.
Yeah, so right, or giving the both ends of the pole here. We talked about bipolar questions, right? Do you favor or oppose congressional term limits? How satisfied or dissatisfied are you? And then we're back to the anchoring bias, which we still have not resolved. So that's a separate problem. But at least we're solving the acquiescence bias here. You're not implying that one, well, unless they anchor in the first one or something, but you're not implying that one option is more desirable than the other. Okay? So this makes a lot of difference. Let's see. Yeah.
Isn't saying how you feel about this thing, wouldn't that thing would be anchoring from and the questions as well?
Yeah. Yes, you could I think you could do that too. Yeah. I think so. An open-ended, yeah, how do you feel about congressional term limits of 4 years? I guess the disconnect there between the possible answers and the question is a little higher. It's more of a disconnect. Because maybe people feel in a different way that's not favor or oppose that you're not capturing. But I think that would work for acquiescence. Example of primacy effects. Which of the following resources have you used at Washington State University? Please check all that apply. So there's a list. It's ordered with checkboxes. People check the ones that apply. In the original order, the one on the left-hand side, 95% of respondents, students said they use the library. Only 20% said they use library instruction, which I don't know what library instruction is. Does anybody know? I don't know what that is, but that's the example that was given here. If you reverse the order of the items, library instruction goes up to 52%, and at the end, library still gets basically the same number of responses. What's happening here? So one, yeah, go.
Just been saying library instruction, that must mean library.
Exactly. That's my guess as well, right? Like you scan this list top to bottom, you see something with library instruction. That probably means library, right? Because maybe like me, you're confused about what library instruction means in the first place. So you select that, and then you get to library at the end, and you're like, oh yeah, that was a separate thing. So, yeah, sure, I use that library too, but I don't go back and edit my earlier answer. Maybe now that I understand better this distinction between library and library instruction. So that's one type of effect that's at play here. What's the best practice for something like this when you have answer options?
The options.
Yes, that is one best practice, is randomize the order of the answers. And if you use something like Qualtrics or so for your survey, I think it does that automatically. I don't know if Google Forms does this. Does anybody know?
There's a box you can check, I think.
To randomize the order? Okay, cool. So even Google Forms would do this, which is a lightweight platform for designing a survey. So that's one good thing. I have another good thing, which I may show you in a minute when I get to that slide. Oh no, I actually have it right here. Perfect. The other thing you could do about this is forced choice. So perfect timing. Forced choice. So example on the top is analogous to the library thing we just saw, checkboxes. The problem with checkboxes is people, fill out one or two if there's too many, they will feel like they filled out a few and that's enough, and they won't bother reading the remaining ones. They won't really try very hard to, identify all of the things from your list that apply to their case. So one recommendation here is to turn these checkboxes into individual questions with radio buttons, basically, where people have to answer all of them, right? So, do you use a desktop computer? Yes or no? And you have to answer, right? You have to click on all of them. So the advantage is that people will actually have to consider all of these options, which they likely will not do if you have checkboxes. The disadvantage is obviously that it's a lot more annoying to fill this out for participants. So you have to tread carefully. The more annoying it is for your participants to fill out your survey, the more likely it is that they will just drop out or not fill it out in the first place. Drop out mid-survey or not fill it out in the first place. It has to be as easy to fill out as possible. And this goes against that principle quite clearly. So I've never used the forced choice answer because I find it super annoying. But this is one of the kind of recommended best practices. You could still randomize the order, by the way, which was a different problem. Okay, then you've heard the term Likert scales before. And fun fact, it's pronounced Likert, not Likert. I also learned this at some point while teaching this class. So this is an example of a Likert scale. Each of these elements on it is an item, and then there are answer options for each of these. There's usually sort of polar extremes on both ends, and then sort of in between options in the middle. Think of this as strongly agree to strongly disagree, or strongly satisfied to strongly dissatisfied, or so. I'm sure you've seen things like this before. Yes? Okay, the most common maybe way of running or designing a questionnaire survey instrument. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. So when we talk about, okay, yeah, so what do you notice about the 5 questions on this scale here? Andy?
Seem like they're very generic or like have many interpretations. Like the user-friendly interface is not something that has like a strong definition.
Okay, yeah, good. So this is important. You're identifying a symptom of larger problem here, meaning that questions are often ambiguous. So that, yes, this is almost always the case, right? It's hard to ask very precise, unambiguous questions, especially when you're talking about some relatively abstract construct or concept. So yes, let's see what Marco had.
Just something that stood out to me about the questions or about the statements is that they all kind of use like subjective terminology. I felt, okay, the website is easy to navigate. The website's pages have it generally have good images.
Yeah, so this is about, people's perception of the usability or whatever of the website.
Sorry, I was just saying, so they're all positive statements?
Yeah.
Okay, that's also good observation. All of these are good observations.
That's what I had the same.
All the questions kind of tie back to whether like it's a friendly interface.
This is the $1 million point for this section. Okay? All of these 5 questions are different facets of the same thing, right? They're all different ways of asking about the usability of the website.
Is that an issue? I mean, I guess it depends on what you care about in the survey. I guess maybe that's the point. But I feel like if I was designing this survey and I wanted to know about the parts of my website that were good and the parts that were bad, then I would want to ask these kind of consequence questions, as well as the general overall, was this user friendly?
Yes, but yes, you may care about the individual dimensions of this. This, however, is the sort of a key design element here. Were there more comments? I'm seeing sort of excited reactions. Yeah.
And my thinking with it is that asking questions 2 through 5 would tell you, you'd be able to like deduce if it has a user-friendly interface or not. And then the only reason why you would really ask 1 is if you wanted to confirm if like people's perception matched what their responses were or something.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to distribute these questions at different points in the survey, you can check consistency of what the user thinks. In case, like for the first question, there's checking agree, but later in the survey, they're checking disagree. So that shows a lot of fluctuating responses.
Yes. So the $1 million idea here is that, for example, because of these many types of biases that we talked about already, in addition to simply all kinds of other sources of noise, people's attention, for example, the researchers, the designers, mistakes in how they formulated these questions in the first place, the vagueness of the concepts and the constructs and so forth, right? Because of all of these factors, if you just ask one question about something that's very complicated, it is very hard to get that right. So the $1 million idea is to turn your questionnaires into scales, which is the sort of collection of questions that all touch or are all touch on different aspects, different dimensions of the same construct. Maybe they're all different ways of phrasing the same question fundamentally. They could be literally different ways of phrasing the same question. Somebody noted that they're all positive. You could have positive and negative ways. You could flip and ask about the reverse. Like all of these different ways of asking about the same thing, and having more of those, like more than one, is always a good idea, especially for complicated, concepts like, I don't know, usability or I don't know, trust or whatever, like things like this that are like really complex concepts. So what happens is, like essentially, fundamentally, the idea is you're trying to average out all of this noise that comes from all of these sources, from the biases, the ways you phrase the question, the people's lost attention, the whatever. You're trying to essentially average out the noise from all of these individual measurements to get a more accurate estimate of how people felt about whatever it is you're asking about. That's really the key here. This is a sort of a absolutely standard, well-known, well-used thing that people do in surveys. You should absolutely do this if you can. So let me tell you a bit more about this. So how do you actually design these, and how do you think about this? And one important consideration here is this consideration of consistency, right? So ideally, right? Ideally, the answers that you get to essentially different versions of fundamentally the same question should be consistent, right? So you'd expect this. Like if you're asking fundamentally about the same thing in slightly different ways, like yes, there's some noise, of course. That's the whole point of asking in different ways, but you should expect that the answers are consistent. So there's this notion of consistency. So they even have measures for this. I think a standard one is this one called Cronbach's alpha measure. This is the average of all possible split half correlations. So the idea is, let's say you have these, 5 questions on your scale, 5 items on your scale. Okay? If you randomly split this set of 5 questions into 2 subsets, right? Halves, like, like size 2 or 3 in this case, because it's an odd number. If you do that, the scores on the first subset should be very similar to the scores on the second subset on average. That makes sense? So this measure, right, gives you a sense of how like high that internal consistency is, right? So you could do this. So do you have an example? The Zoom thing is super annoying. Yeah, here's an example. So this is an example from a paper that colleagues at CMU wrote some years ago on brainstorming. The topic of the paper was brainstorming. How do teams brainstorm? And they had they had 7 items, meaning 7 questions on their questionnaire. Okay? The group aimed to generate as many ideas as possible. How strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statement, right? So people would, rate this, strongly agree, strongly disagree, whatever. All ideas are welcome, no matter how unconventional, etc. You can read the list there. So what they found, the researchers, is that once they looked at the inter-rater reliability of this scale, when they would do this like random splitting thing, the 7th question they had there produced very inconsistent answers with the previous 6. The previous 6 were all very consistent, highly consistent, right? When you do this like random splitting, the 7th one was not. And group members criticized ideas proposed during the group session. Okay? So the researchers did this internal reliability analysis of their scale, from which they concluded that the 7th question is not reliable, and they removed it. And they did this on a pilot or something, on a small set of responses. They removed the question from the instrument because the other 6 were highly internally consistent. And then they ran the survey, right? Once they had confirmed that they had a good scale to capture, this thing they were measuring. Okay, so really the principle is like trying to average out noise here. That's the idea, the key idea. Okay. That makes sense? So that's about consistency, right? That's something you should care about when you're designing a survey instrument, also known as a questionnaire. You should care about consistency, and you should, for example, use one of these measures of internal consistency or inter-rater reliability. The other dimension, I see this less often, is stability, meaning, if you ask the same questions later, would you get radically different answers? Like, I mean, for, I don't know, political opinions, that's expected. For something like, stable traits like personality, that should not be the case. So, if you have such a stable trait that you're, asking questions about, the answers should be stable over time, because these things are not expected to change. Okay, all right. Another consideration here, should items have a midpoint? Right. So strongly agree to strongly disagree, or vice versa. But is there a midpoint to the scale, like a neither? Neither, agree nor disagree. What do you think?
I mean, it has happened to me that sometimes when answering these types of questions, I had no idea what the question was about, so I don't want to choose either.
Yeah, you're a poster child for this slide. Thank you.
like the opposite way where I've been told by like other researchers that you shouldn't include a neither option because it forces, like kind of similar to like the check boxes with the forced choice, it forces people to pick like whether they agree or disagree.
Yeah, exactly. So, by the way, so your paper reviews don't have a borderline usually option. You either, weakly accept or strongly, or weakly reject or strongly. There's no option to just like not have an opinion, whether the paper should get in or not. So it's the same principle there. The idea here is that, um, people might be ambivalent about their attitude or might simply not have an opinion. And you can't really tell the difference between these two otherwise very different scenarios if you just have this midpoint. So one option is to have I don't have an opinion, as opposed to I'm ambivalent, right? You could have an explicit I don't have an opinion option here. But otherwise, you can also just remove the midpoint to force people's choice in one direction. You should do this carefully, though, right? Because what happens to the people that are truly on the border there, right? You're now biasing their responses, right, in a way that's not genuine. Right? So, if there are such people that are truly on the fence about whatever it is you're asking, right? If you force them to choose in one direction or another, that does not reflect their true opinion anymore. So this can backfire, but I guess it depends which bias you're more worried about. Right. And one problem is this, again, this is an example of acquiescence bias. People that are conflict avoiding by nature, by personality, might just prefer to choose this midpoint to avoid disagreeing either way. Yeah, and there've been studies, amazingly, there've been studies on all of these little things. You can find lots of them. There've been studies that claim all kinds of effects in either direction. There've been some replications that could not confirm them, etc. But people have been studying the impact of these design choices for the answers that you get. Yeah, we talked about bias in the opposite direction. Okay, so I guess to sum up this whole bit on Likert items and scales, yes, you should follow these best practices as much as you can. You're probably fine though, in all of these different conditions, with or without a midpoint, etc. You're probably fine. I think the effects for all of these kinds of design choices are relatively small. The really huge effect here, the thing that will make the most difference is using a scale over single items. So you should absolutely, absolutely do this whenever possible. Like this will make a huge difference on the quality of the data you get back. Using a scale with multiple items, asking about the same concept over single items about that concept. Like this is the number one thing that you should do that will improve the quality of your surveys. All the other things are good too, but I think relatively compared to this one, less impactful. But do them as much as you can as well.
Does it matter if those items are scattered across the survey, or the example you showed, they're all like one following another?
Yeah, so here, let me show you one example. This is a questionnaire sent to seventh graders about their enjoyment with writing. It's quite long. What else do you notice here? This goes to your scattered point.
Both opposites of essence.
Yeah, so for example, I love writing and I hate writing. You think of this as an attention check, or these are two items on the same scale, right? You're asking about how much people like writing, right? So they should, if they love writing, they should score highly or strongly agree that they love writing and strongly disagree that they hate writing, right? And if their answers to these two polarly opposite items are very inconsistent, that's probably a problem. Like indicates that I don't know, they didn't take the survey seriously or something, right? Like this is a silly example in the sense that it's never quite this clearly opposite. It's usually more subtle, right? But like here, think of this as an attention check. Right, here's another one. Writing is my favorite school subject. Writing gives me pleasure. Then you have an opposite one. Writing is boring, right? Negatively coded. Or I write because I have to at school, also negatively coded, right? I don't enjoy doing it. It's not my favorite subject. I just do it because I have to, right? So 4 items that all ask about the same thing, for example. So the other thing I didn't get to talk much about, and I guess I won't have a lot of time to talk about, is this idea of factor analysis. There's a numeric way or statistical way to analyze your scale to figure out how many latent factors there are. Usually the factors correspond to these underlying concepts that you're actually asking about. In this case, when you do this like factor decomposition, turns out that there are 2 factors among the in this data set here that between the 2 of them account for about 50%, half of all of the variance in the data. Okay, so you don't need 20 questions, right? You don't need 20 variables. You can capture half of all of the variance in these 20 variables with just 2, is what they're saying. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Because, right, as you would expect, by design, the answers to many of these questions should be correlated because you did that on purpose. You deliberately asked different formulations of the same question, right, to increase the reliability of your survey, right? So you'd expect that the answers would be correlated. So here, I'm showing you. I guess we could do this. We could do this hands-on together in class. I'll show you how to actually do this directly yourselves. But here they're showing that there are only 2 variables. You could decompose this in only 2 variables that account for most of the variance in the responses. And they're showing how, in this case, all of the positively worded items load onto the first factor, meaning are captured by this first variable, and all of the negative ones, the ones that are grayed out, load onto the second factor, which is sort of expected when you ask reverse phrased questions like this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is also, like, if you account for this reverse coding as well, basically all of these 20 questions ask about the same thing. They're all one. And here you could use 2 variables if you want to reduce all of these 20 to just 2. And that's a good thing. So that indicates that you've had a good scale here, right? Because all of these things are consistent, and you can reduce all of this data to 1 or 2 variables and then use those in your downstream analysis. I'll show you how to do this yourselves hands-on in class next time. Maybe bring a laptop.